Padmasaki for the meditation just earlier. And yes, Padmasaki said we have 2 Sangha nights, so tonight and next week, about going on retreat. And so it's sounds a bit boring when I say it like that, isn't it? But maybe it isn't at all. I don't find retreats boring, but it's a bit like that. The phrase is not so catching. But there's something about really going away from what is familiar to us. That is what it's about. Really, what are retreats about? Every sort of serious, when we are serious about practicing the Dharma more deeply, we really want to become aware of our stuckness, in a way, in our habits, in our views, in our habitual patterns, and see how we actually are, as the Buddha said, motivated mainly by craving and hatred and ignorance. So that's strong stuff, isn't it? Is ignorance really that brings about craving and hatred. So we really, with Dharma practice, really trying to turn that around, and with really deepening and broadening our awareness of looking deeply into how we function. And so turn that around, that real change to actually coming from inside into conditionality, really, and then sort of being more motivated, if not totally motivated, just by insight or wisdom and generosity and kindness. That sounds very different, isn't it, than greed, hatred, and delusion. So in a way, that's what we are trying to do, what Dharma practice is about. And retreats are one of those conditions that help us to look more deeply into what ticks us, what drives us. So yeah, tonight we're going to look into going on retreat away from our familiar situation, going somewhere else for a retreat. And next week we're going to look into actually being at home and being on retreat, or online retreats. That's quite a new phenomena, but I think it's become very popular in the recent months because it had to be. But yeah, that can still be very effective. So that's for next week. We have both evenings, we have 3 speakers. Everybody will speak about 10 minutes or so. And we'll have people from different experiences on the retreat. So tonight we have Ed and Vanessa and Kusaladevi speaking. So I'm say a little bit more about all those 3 in a bit, but they all have different years of experiencing Dharma practice and of being able to go on retreat. So Ed has been not so often on retreat yet, I don't think, and Kusaladevi has been for months on retreats. So it's nice to have that range, yeah. And so next week we have Zach and Gita and Anthony speaking to us about online retreats, the experience of that. So I'm really looking forward to hearing actually all those speakers about it and making this theme, which is very alive. We will have groups after that as well. I don't know how much time we'll have after they've all spoken, but we will break into smaller groups and just share a bit about our experience, if we have it, of going on retreat. Yeah, I think most of us have done something. So let's share that. But first I want to just do a few announcements for what things that are coming up. Actually, this Friday is a very special day. It's actually the 30th of October, which is when Sangha died 2 years ago. So Padmasaki and Bodhinaya and Sadie actually is supporting that as well, and Stephen, they're supporting the Puja Nights. Padmasaki and Bodhinaya have started Puja Nights, as we all know. And this Friday Puja Night will be a special about remembering Sangha and remembering his death. So do come along, it's 7:15. The other thing I want to mention is Singhashree's retreat. So that's coming up on the 7th and the 8th of November, so quite soon. It's hosted, it's a Sangha retreat for us as our local Sangha from our Nottingham centre. Singashree has come along actually physically to the centre to lead a retreat for us in the actual centre, but this time, of course, it will be online. It's Saturday and Sunday. It's just a morning and an afternoon session each day. And I just really want you all to really encourage you to come. Singashree is a really good meditation teacher, but also she is a beautiful Dharma practitioner. And she's been very involved with the courageous conversations about, actually initiated, or what is it? Because I can't find my word, sorry. Triggered by Black Lives Matter. She's very involved with that and thinks deeply about that. She'll bring some of that in, no doubt. But she's just a really beautiful Dharma and meditation teacher. So do come, if you can, do come. So you book via the website, the Nottingham Centre website, and it will be open to people from other Sanghas as well. So there will be guests to our Sangha, but also it's very much an opportunity for us to be on the retreat together. So that's Singashree, 7 and 8 November. And the other thing about the future Sangha night themes. So we have these next two evenings, tonight and next week, about going on retreat. And then we'll do something different with the Sangha nights. We won't always have breakout groups. We do more workshop-y style stuff, and we'll start with exploring the precepts. But it will be more on that another time. But yeah, it will be different. It's good sometimes to do things. We get into habitual patterns, don't we, of getting used to how things are done. But we're going to change that a bit. So that's Sangha nights. The other thing is, last week we raised £400 for India within our Sangha night. So Sanganath was here to speak about Dr. Ambedkar, Buddhism and Black Lives Matter. I thought it was a very moving evening, actually. And so we raised £400, which is fantastic, to give away to India. And we're going to give it away to 4 courses in India. So one is the Indian Dharma Trust, India Dharma Trust, which is actually that supports Dharma teaching, Triratna Dharma teaching within India. Yeah, so it supports actually people like Karuna Maya, who at the moment lives with me. She's worked tirelessly actually for 20, I think might be coming up to 25 years, if not longer, for the women in India. She's ordained many of them. She's Kalyana Mitra to many of them. Yeah, she led many retreats. She lived and worked there. And that sort of money supports people like her. Yeah, so we're going to give 100 to that. 100 to Nagaloka, which is like a study center, Buddhist retreat center, but also very much a study center for younger people to study Buddhism. Nagaloka in India. It's a Triratna place, but it's especially for young people. Karuna, Kusaladevi worked for Karuna, did the door knocking appeals, raising money for projects in India, social projects in particular. And then there's recently what has been set up is the India Crisis Appeal. You could say the emergency fund for helping people who are very affected by COVID. And that's set up by order members in India. So actually not to give just for people within our Sangha, but also for people who just need it around the cities, especially in Maharashtra. So yeah, so we decided to give 100 to each, which is fantastic. So well done, us, for really giving and helping. That money will go quite a way, I think, in India. So yeah, that's, I think, all on that. Those
Can
points.
I make an announcement, Singashree?
Yeah, go for it.
Could I make a quick announcement?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, sorry, I think internet. Yeah, I just want to make a little announcement about a Friday morning follow-on course that's starting next week. So any of you who might be free on a Friday morning, Rachel and I are running a 6-week course, 10 to 12 on Zoom on a Friday morning. And we'll be looking a little bit at a sutta called the Meditation Toolkit. It's a sutta where the Buddha has interactions a very enthusiastic but somewhat misguided young man, and gives him some suggestions, some advice. So we'll be looking at those suggestions and sort of exploring how they might be helpful and relevant to us. And we'll also be meditating together. And yeah, so if you're interested in coming, that would be great. You can book on the website. So yeah, lovely to
so
see
that's
you.
a follow-up course, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's a follow-up course. Yeah.
It's a follow-on course, which means that it's open to anyone who's done an introductory course, one of our introductory courses. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So just, on to tonight's speakers, tonight's theme. I just want to say a little bit about each of the speakers, and then I'll hand on the microphone to you, if that's what happens. Yeah. So I first want to say a little bit about Ed. Ed, I think you're going to be our first speaker. Are you okay with that? Yeah, but I'll say something about you first. Ed is a wonderful being to have in our Sangha. If you've been in the center recently, you know, the reception space downstairs is a big mess. And Ed is part of that, making that mess and actually making it look better. It's a big transformation that's taking place. At the moment, he hasn't got the window right behind him now, but last week I saw one of the windows behind the sofa. So Ed is at the moment working on a window at home. So that's how dedicated he is. It's fantastic. I see Ed as somebody who is a very generous and lovely man, but also to me, this is a gentleness about Ed, and a real skilled craftsman. Yeah, I think he's got a real eye for detail as well. So I really want to rejoice in that, Ed. The other thing about Ed is that if you remember the days when we were able to bring food to the center and, you know, share together and eat together, those were the days. Ed loves cooking and baking. And I just remember him bringing stuff and delicious stuff. Yeah, just want to rejoice in that as well, how much he loves cooking and baking, and his word tasting. Yeah, so yeah, it's lovely to have you in the Sangha, Ed, really. And then Vanessa, you'll be the second speaker. I can't see Vanessa on my screen right now, but Vanessa, when I think of Vanessa, I think of, I feel joy. Vanessa is a joy to be with. Also, whenever Vanessa speaks, when she's done little talks in the center or bigger ones, or even a Dharma appeal, I love listening to Vanessa. And I think there's always some authenticity there. Yes, she brings very much her own experience in there, but there's also a real sense of humor, you know, a little bit of a wit. So, which I love. I love that combination of Vanessa with a bright mind, authenticity, and a sense of humor. So Vanessa very courageously stepped out of her familiar situation into 6 months in Taraloka Retreat Center. She lived there and worked there for 6 months last year. That was that's stepping out of your normal situation, you're familiar. She was living there, I think, with something like 10 others, running the retreat center, being the gardener mainly. That's intensity, yeah, that's intensity. She might speak a bit about that tonight. But yeah, that's really courageous. So here, Vanessa, I know she really wants to go deeper, actually, in familiarizing herself with those habitual patterns and undoing them. Yeah, so that's Vanessa. And Kusaladevi, she'll be the last speaker. Of course, our new chair courageously stepped into that space. I think of Kusaladevi as a very serious practitioner. I've known you for quite a few years now. As a mitra, Kusaladevi went on one of the first Dharma life courses that were there for that was set up for young people. She lived in Taraloka. I think it was 6 months then, or was it 5 months? I can't remember. But she went to live and practice in an intense situation like that as well, like Vanessa. But yeah, this was a Dharma life course. And then Kusaladevi stepped into running Karuna appeals. So for, the Karuna appeals, door knocking appeals, raising money for projects in India. And again, that's quite something to do. And so she was a door knocker herself, and then she became a very skilled, leader of those appeals. So holding a team and helping the people in the team to go onto the streets every night and actually together practice the Dharma and go deeper. So again, I see Kusaladevi as a very courageous person, a very challenging person, at the same time a real warmth and a very good communicator. What was the 10? What's that?
10 months at Taraloka.
10 months. 10 months at Taraloka. That was much longer than the 6. Yeah, okay. There you go. So Kusaladevi is another person I really love listening to. She's inspired in practice and a very good communicator. So enough said. Time to get on with it, really. So I'm not going to time you three. So it's about 10 minutes. Or shall I do a bell? 10 minutes. Actually, I will. I will ring a bell at 10 minutes, yeah? And then you can carry on or finish what you were saying. How's that?
It's off.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
So, Ed, you're first.
Right. Thank you, Singashree. I hope everybody can hear me. There you go. Lots of thumbs up. It was very lovely to hear from Singashree, and very, very lovely to hear about her reflection on me. There's a few things that she brought up that actually I've been reflecting on as well, where I reflected on today, which is it's virtually 2 years exactly since I walked in through the centre door, because my first time at the centre was on the day of Sangha death. And so, yes, it's a bit of an odd time. And now this is the first time I'm actually ever speaking to the Sangha directly, and not just doing DIY in the background somewhere. So, yeah. So, I am the least experienced in terms of going on retreat of the speakers today. And I have had a bit of experience on a range of retreats over my time. And in some ways, I've accidentally sort of built up my experience and my confidence in retreats, because I started off with a few one-day retreats at the Sangha in the centre, and then a couple of weekend retreats. And then I went on the Sangha retreat to Castleton last year. And I also went on the Adhisthana one this year as well. So I've built up a bit of experience within a more familiar environment. And between them, I went to the one that I will speak about most today, which is the Great Gathering at Padmaloka last year, which was a 3-day retreat, and it was my first time properly out into the wider community of within our tradition. What I will say now is whatever I say coming up, it was all a positive experience. Maybe sometimes it took me a while to realize that that's what it had been. Sometimes maybe weeks or months. But yes, I would wholeheartedly say that all the retreats I've been on have been worth going for all sorts of manner of reasons. But predominant one is very similar to what Kevin C was talking about, which is essentially challenging myself to get out of my own place. And that has been one of the greatest challenges for me, is actually stepping away from the comforts of being outside of my own house, essentially. For quite a few years, I had a bit of a fear of travel in general. Although I did travel, I was always terrified before I went. And these are the retreats that I've been on have really helped me sort of encourage me to go. And yeah, they have been, like, I will say they have all been positive, though you are going to hear some different words soon. So, as I said, the Sangha retreats were a great introduction to retreats. They were generally more workshopped, but they were a great way of me, because I'd never been on a retreat. I never knew what even a retreat was. So if someone said a retreat to me, I'd be like, well, you're going to go somewhere and you're going to sit quietly, probably getting massages, kind of going to be in your hot bath and stuff. I have been on one of them, and but these are very different, and in some ways I find them much more engaging than those kind of relaxing ones, and they are stressful in a completely different way. Just trying to relax is hard enough, and but being able to challenge yourself and find more peace within yourself from those experiences is actually far more relaxing than going and having somebody pummel you with hot stones for half an hour. Or that's what I have found, because it's brought me greater peace in my life in general. And with those early experiences of retreat, it was Ari Varchin, he pushed me to come along to the Castleton retreat, which was at quite a hard time in my life, where I really didn't want to be, I was dealing with quite a lot of things, and it was a very helpful atmosphere to get out. And I realized then that one of my fears was, if I went on a retreat, was I going to be restricted? It was going to be like going to an army camp, and you were going to be rigidly have to be involved in everything. And what I found was you can engage as much as you want or as little as you want. And it's a space for you to really essentially find your space. But by having people around you which support that energy and support your whole growth is so important, being on as part of that. And you get to know other people more deeply, you get to understand yourself better in relation to other people as well. And those retreats help you. I've used them as great experiences to get deeper into my own spiritual practice, which a few years ago I didn't even know that I was going to ever have a spiritual practice in any way whatsoever. So that spiritual side of it has been really important to me, because it's something that I have realized that I've needed or wanted for a long time, but not been able to recognize it. And with Ari Varchin's prompting, my biggest experience of the spiritual awakening was when I went to Padmaloka for the Great Gathering, which I will not bandy about the bush. It was a terrifying experience. It was like, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what I was doing. I was going there. I traveled there on my own. There was some people within the Sangha that were going, but I get there and there's like nearly 100 other men, like, that I just have no idea about. I don't know what I'm doing. Ari Varchin gave me a tour of the place. I didn't know what was going on. I was going to be living in a room with 6 other people. I was terrified if I was going to be snoring, keeping people awake. I was worried about getting up at like 5:30 in the morning, because I do not get up at that time. And yeah, all these things just going on, all those worries that go in your head, all those little things that you kind of think, am I going to be bored? How am I going to live without a TV? How am I not going to have my phone? All these little basic things that you just take for granted every day. And what I found, apart from the trying to make sure I wake up at the right time, because they don't want alarms, all of that kind of just disappeared once I got there. And it was a terrifying experience, and it was very overwhelming. And the one thing that really cemented the whole event for me was the first time in the shrine room at Padmaloka. I'd gone in and I'd hidden myself right at the back in the eaves, keep away from everywhere. And I think I was very well placed, because on the first time we were honouring the 3 jewels and we were chanting the precept, I was completely blown away by the sound of having 100 other people chanting in unison. And that is one of the most terrifying experiences I've had there, because it blew me open in a way that I never knew that I could be. So by going on that retreat, I was exposed to something that the wider community, the energy and the enthusiasm of so many people coming together to do the same thing at the same time in the same place, was just too much for me in some ways. And it took me about, I don't know, 2 months, 2-3 months of sort of thinking about it, reflecting afterwards, to actually understand that all the fear that came up when that happened to me was actually me fighting a resistance to actually sort of give myself up to the experience that I'd had, which was a very overwhelming spiritual experience of feeling very connected and actually realizing that this was something that really meant something to me. And it's not something I felt since, because I haven't been in that situation, and it's not something I'd felt before. And I don't think I would have ever experienced that if I wasn't in such an environment where you're completely on your own, but you're also completely with other people as well at the same time. And yeah, I think about that time a lot, and I have very vivid memories of the sound coming through and sort of really penetrating my soul in some ways. And if anybody who goes on retreat could experience what I experienced there, then I would be very happy that people have gone on retreat and they found something that I think really means something. And if that's all you ever get from retreat, then it'd be fantastic, because it would really sort of help grow you, sort of get you in touch with your spiritual side. And from all the worries and everything that went on there, that just blew them out of the water and left me kind of shell-shocked for quite a long time. And yeah, and I would love to go and sort of re-experience that again at some point when we are outside of all this COVID lockdown stuff. And yeah, but my last words are, I have never ever sort of doubted that having gone on retreat, that it was a negative experience. It may have taken me quite a long time to realize that, but they've had such a profound effect on me in many different ways that, yeah, I would never regret doing them, and I'll do them again. Although I'll probably go through all the same fears again beforehand. So yeah, and my thing just flashed red. So thank you very much, and I'll see you in the groups.
Thank you, Ed. Lovely, really beautiful. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So, Vanessa, you're next.
Should probably unmute myself, shouldn't I?
Yeah, it's a good thing.
Just going to go to gallery view because it's rather alarming to see a large self. I feel a bit of pressure to be funny now, Kemasiri, but we'll see how we go. That was a great start.
You are
Ed.
anyway.
You. Yeah.
You are funny anyway, Vanessa. Forget about it.
I'll just leave now then. Okay, so going on retreat. I remember somebody saying quite early on in my Sangha life, that they used to use their holiday to go on retreat. And I remember just being really bemused, I think is probably the word. I'm a big holiday person. I love my holidays. So the idea of actually using my precious time to go somewhere with people I don't know and meditate, not always my favorite activity, just seemed like a really strange thing to do. And then there was a weekend retreat at the centre that Sadhanandi ran. And I remember just having a really strong effect on me. And I was moving to a place where, this is probably nearly a year after I'd done the intro course, where I was going to ask to be a mitra. So then I thought, well, maybe a retreat is the next step. It seems to be what people do. And there were these weekends, and I thought, no, let's go for a week. Let's go for a full week. Come on, in it to win it. So I toddle off to Taraloka to do a retreat on metta. And a bit like what Ed's describing, it was such a powerful experience. It's hard to kind of it's just hard to articulate what happens on retreat, really. It was challenging, it was pokey, but it was definitely faith building. We did a lot of devotional practice in the evening, and that helped open me up in a way that I hadn't been before. I think there's something about the intensity of residential retreat that you just don't get in, week out Sangha practice, or I haven't experienced the same sort of thing. There's something about that concentration. The next retreat I did was 4 months later in the summer, and that was actually a meditation retreat with Singashree, who's coming this weekend. And that was the first retreat I'd done with her. And that moved me so much, I asked for ordination. So be careful what happens this weekend, okay? She's a powerful woman. But again, just this sort of intensity of practice, intensity and concentration of intention, I suppose. A lot of people gathered together with a similar intention, a similar focus. Can really create things. And since then, I've managed to get on retreat twice a year. So I'm quite happily seem to be able to give up my holiday allowance to toddle off to various parts, random places in Wales. That's where all the women's retreat centres seem to be. But each time there's a mix of trepidation. Who will be there? Who'll be in the room? Do they snore? Will I sleep? Will there be people who get up and wee? What will the porridge be like? All those sorts of things that seem really minor but can kind of make or break a retreat. Well, they don't really make or break a retreat, but they can loom quite large on the idea of going on retreat. But there's also a thrill and an anticipation because of this sort of intensity. I've had some of the most powerful meditation experiences on retreat, just because I'm actually doing it regularly, probably, and also it's that minimal input. I've had sort of a clear moments of insight on retreat that I'd never had at home. It's having a sense of interconnectedness and just real, strength of faith response that I don't tend to have in my everyday life. And I cherish those. I mean, they're so, wow, for me, that's part of what the spiritual life is about. There's also the silence. So once you start to go on a retreat that's maybe a week or a fortnight, there'll be a period of time, sometimes maybe only a couple of days, maybe 3 or 4 days if it's a fortnight retreat, which are held in silence. And wow, that wasn't something I ever thought I'd enjoy, but it's there's something very beautiful, I think, about being with other people just being with other people in silence can be very powerful. And it sort of relieves some of the need to have to make conversation and have to try and connect with people in the usual way that we do it. It allows you to connect with people in a completely different way, which is quite unusual. I love the idea of having my phone off. I wasn't sure about that the first time. You're not having that pressure to reply, not having to think about going shopping or washing or, you know, other household or work stuff, that you're just relieved. It's not like you don't have to do stuff. There are still chores to be done, cooking to help with, toilets to be cleaned, you know, the kind of stuff that helps the place function. But somehow it seems different because it's a collective experience. You're all there together, you're all sharing it together. So you're not just sharing your practice, you're sharing it, shrine room practice, you're sharing your life practice as well. And I think some of the most challenging times can be in the kitchen. That's where the rubs happen, I found on retreat. You know, I remember having a really strong reaction for somebody trying to tell me how to chop carrots. It's like, yes, I've chopped a carrot before in my life. I think how I chop a carrot will work in this dish. But yeah, I think that kind of kitchen stuff, that's where the rubs happen. So there is that sort of coming up against yourself on quite a regular basis, as well as that deepening of faith. And then some of the women that I've been in groups with, there's a couple who have become really, really close friends, from different Sanghas. So I think it's another experience or another opportunity to experience the broader Triratna. Otherwise, we only kind of have this sense of this is what Nottingham does and this is how Nottingham does it, which is great. But I think, you know, Triratna is a worldwide movement. And once you start going on retreats regularly, you'll find that there are people from all over the place, not just the UK. And certainly the training for ordination retreats, you start getting a lot of women from mainland Europe. I've experienced the last retreat I was on, there's a woman from Australia, there's been people from America, New Zealand. So you just get this really broad sense of what Triratna is that you don't tend to have just within our Sangha. Yeah, they're this sort of ready-made context that's just waiting for you to turn up and share with others, and just that sort of level of spiritual friendship that can develop, which, you know, as the Buddha says, is the key to the spiritual life. And friendship is such an important part of my life. And having met some of these women and shared with them things that people I've known for years don't know about me. So I tend to alternate at the moment. I try and do a meditation retreat, and then I try and do a study retreat. But actually this Saturday, I'm going on a solitary retreat, which is another form of residential retreat and has its own challenges. Yeah, I'm trying to get in touch with how I feel about it. There's quite a lot of trepidation about this one. It's only the second solitary retreat I've done. And I do find it challenging. I like people, I like company, you know, solitude. Probably like silence is one of those things that I would always have shied away from, and don't necessarily choose. But it brings up questions of like, what should I be doing? Because there's no schedule. I mean, that's one of the nice things about the retreats at retreat centres, is there's a very sort of, like Ed said, you know, you don't have to join in with everything, but there is a schedule for the day, a schedule for the week that you're there. Whereas a solitary retreat, there isn't, you know, it's just you and your mind, and no deadlines. So what I'm going to do this time is try and sort of just go without a clock, go with intuition, go with a sense of just feeling my way through the day. But this time of year does evoke a lot of fear for me around darkness, and being on a solitary retreat in November isn't really, I can sort of feel this woof of energy just thinking about it. It's maybe not where I'd have chosen, when I'd chosen to go, but it's what I'm doing. But but it can be alarming but freeing, I think, just not having a schedule and a set way of doing things and a set time for doing things. So I think it sort of helps me, yeah, it's challenging those views that I don't like this and I do like that. That definitely does come up. And, you know, my longer experience of Tara Loka, that even though that wasn't a retreat, really did challenge a lot of those self-views. You know, living with 9 other women, who apparently want to do things differently to me and have different ideas. It's quite it's like, oh, it just feels just kind of buff against people all the time. But I think it's a broadening, widening, slightly painful experience that I wouldn't have been without. And there's just something about retreats, residential retreats, they've been a really important part of my spiritual life so far. And I get to that point, there's a point in the year where I think I need a retreat. I've had a sense of a lack, and it's almost like a shot in the arm for my practice. Gets me back on course, gets me back meditating regularly, helps me focus. Whereas I can sort of meander a bit at home and yeah, and ramble, which is probably what I'm doing now. So maybe just summing up, go on retreat. Okay. It's a bit tricky at the moment because they're all closed, or many of them are closed. I think Dana Kosher have started to do things. But if you haven't already, I mean, start small or start big, have a go. The weekend ones coming up will be great, but when you get the chance to do something residential, it's completely different. And yeah, you won't regret it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you. Thank you very much. That was a bit funny as well. Thank you. Hey, Kusaladevi is next.
Yeah, great. Just change my view as well. Oh, it's really lovely to hear you both, actually, Ed and Vanessa. And it's great, actually, just hearing you two talk. It just brings a lot back about my own experiences of retreats as well. So, yeah, including something that I wasn't going to say, but I will say, which is the first retreat I went on, which was at Tara Loka. I remember, like, I got there and as I was sort of driving there, like, you know, retreats are often in quite remote places. And, you know, driving to Tara Loka, it's like you get more and more into the countryside. And I sort of arrived there at this long driveway, and you have this, like, about a mile, no, maybe not a mile, I don't know how long it is. I'm not very good with distance. It's quite a long track. So I was driving down this track and arrived in this beautiful place, parked in the car park. And as soon as I put my handbrake on, I just burst out crying. I was just like sobbing. I just couldn't stop sobbing. And there was something about the sort of relief and release of, I don't know, just like giving myself and my practice that particular time and space, and just really allowing, really stepping into conditions that would be supportive for my practice. So yeah, there was this real kind of like relief and just sort of a lot of joy at being in such a beautiful place as well. Yeah. So yeah, I think really this has been said a little bit tonight, but what retreat's about for me is opportunities to understand my own mind, my own conditioning, my views, my tendencies, and to start to see them in a helpful way without judgment, and then start to consider how can I sort of creatively work with them. And also having a more intense period of practice, which might inspire and nourish me and sort of keep me going a bit. So Vanessa said that, like feeling that need of like, oh, I just need a retreat just to sort of top me up a bit. Yeah. But I was reflecting on Well, I was thinking that we're thinking about specifically this week about residential retreats, because I was thinking there are some things about retreats generally, but yeah, just specifically, what is it about residential retreats that are sort of useful? And I think one of the things is those outer conditions, which are really supportive for Dharma practice. And for me, like when I was thinking about the outer conditions that you step into on a residential retreat, a lot of them are about spaciousness, actually. And I thought, oh, that's been a theme for me in the last few years, this theme of like, how do I create the conditions for spaciousness within my own mind? And of course, it's possible to do it when you're not in outer spaciousness, but actually it's much easier to contact an inner spaciousness when your outer conditions reflect that, I find. So yeah, a theme for me on retreats, like all of the retreats that I've been on have been in beautiful surroundings in nature. So very quiet spaces, very remote spaces. There's been a number of times where I've sort of stepped out of shrine rooms and just felt this joy, almost rapture in my body at seeing a beautiful landscape, a flower, a sunset, or sometimes something as simple as just like feeling raindrops on my skin. But something about like my consciousness, like affecting, seeing how my consciousness then affects how I see the world, so that my mind really shapes the world. Yeah. And also shrine rooms, I think, are such a wonderful space on retreat. So this beautiful space with a Buddha right at the center, this sort of focus of a Buddha. And also shrine rooms just feel like such a safe space. So for me, there's something about arriving on a retreat, like finding your space, your mat in a shrine room, like deciding where you want to sit for that time, and just sort of getting really comfy and getting all your stuff there, and knowing like, oh, this is a space where there's going to be potential for me to sort of understand more about myself, contact my own depths, and contact my inspiration and the ideal. Yeah. So yeah, I was thinking about shrine rooms being a beautiful space of holding as well. And then that simplicity that Vanessa touched on, like that, you know, there's a lot of things about retreats that are very simple. So not having technology around you, not having phones on or the internet, the rooms and the sort of decoration and the spaces on retreats being quite simple. So not having like lots of photos around or lots of ornaments around or things. Actually, it's funny, I remember the first Karana appeal that I went on, like we do try and find spaces when we're on Karana appeals that are a bit retreat-like, because they're quite intense. So it's like a 6-week, it is a bit like an urban retreat. So you're having like a retreat in the day and then you're going out and knocking in the evenings. But the first retreat, the first Karana appeal I did, the only house that they could find in Brighton was this really tiny, stuffy house. And it was like full of the person's belongings who was renting it. So I remember like walking in and there were just like family photos all over the walls, and like everything was floral and kind of really quite bright. And it just felt, it was just a bit like there's this stepping into this really intense experience of living with 3 other women and learning how to door knock. And it just felt like the surroundings just weren't very conducive to that. Whereas in retreat centres, often the surroundings are really sort of quite simple, quite basic, and really sort of can reflect back that sense of spaciousness, I think. Yeah, just having less input, having more simple food, like in a sense, sort of simple, healthy food, fewer distractions. And then that leads to more mental and emotional space for me to be with my inner world in a way. And, you know, sometimes that's enjoyable and at other times that's really painful. And it's a bit like, oh, I don't want to do this, you know, so the resistance can come. And yeah, I can relate to what you were saying, Ed, about retreats just not always being easy, but always feeling worthwhile. I can really relate to that. And just being in a different space than usual is really valuable. So this opportunity to step out of my habitual ways and the tendencies that I might not even notice in my space at home. So all those habits and ways of being, even how I move about the space at home, it's like when you're in a different space, you just have to be aware of how you're moving in that space. And there's something about that which I think can kind of wake you up a bit. I think it wakes you up to your experience of your body, of how you relate with others, of how you relate with the space around you. So yeah, I thought that was one of the first things, was this thing about outer conditions and how they're helpful on a residential retreat. And then another area for me is being with others. So if it is a group retreat, I think you can just get a real connection and depth of Sangha practice on a retreat. So I think there's such an opportunity for deeper communication. And in a way, like, that's because we're all a bit more in contact with our own depths. So it's like you can relate to each other from that place when you're on a retreat. So I've often had like conversations over a cup of tea or a meal. And like Vanessa was saying, they can be really significant and the start of a really strong friendship, a lifelong friendship with people. Or sometimes they're just sort of a reassuring and supportive connection with someone who we might never meet again. But there's something about, like, when we're connecting over Dharma practice, that any differences or barriers drop away and are irrelevant. So I've often had, like, you know, just that natural thing of feeling drawn towards some people and not others. And on retreat, like, I think it's a really great opportunity to work with going beyond that. So I actually make a bit of a practice, if there's someone on the retreat that I feel a bit of aversion towards, I make a bit of a practice of sitting with them at dinner and getting to know them and have a chat with them. And every single time I do that, it's like, oh, my heart just opens, because it's like suddenly it's just possible to connect with anyone. It's, yeah, that's the most inspiring of Bante's sort of readings for me, is why I am a Buddhist, that it's possible to connect with and be friends with any other human being. And it's like every time I do that and practice that and see that, it just reaffirms that possibility that can be the case with anyone. So yeah, that's a helpful practice for me on a retreat. But it's not always easy being around others. It's another opportunity for reflecting back our mental states. So for me, it's like when I'm on a retreat, I see those reactions much more strongly. So I ask myself, like, why am I reacting? What am I reacting to? And what might be significant in that? What can I actually learn about myself, about that reactivity? So yeah, just having a learning attitude on a retreat, curiosity and openness to my own tendencies, I suppose. Yeah, and I was going to mention the kitchen as well, Vanessa. The kitchen is one of those like areas. I was thinking, like, when I did the ethics retreat at Tiratnaloka, which is an ordination training retreat, and you do confession practice on that retreat. So you learn how to do confession practice in a Buddhist, in the Buddhist tradition. And so often we'd be in our confession groups and someone would go, so I was in the kitchen today. It's like so many of people's confessions were about being in the kitchen, because you do just rub up against each other in that way. But it is just really useful. Like, what you learn about yourself in that context is really useful. And also, like, being with others, the teams on retreats are so supportive. So I find, like, these teams who are skillfully sort of meeting what the retreat needs. So I've been on a number of retreat teams, and it's quite a practice to be on a team, because what you're trying to do is shape the input around what's needed. So of course you have an idea of the program of what you're going to deliver, but you're also really sensitive to the retreat and to what's happening for people and to what people might need. And I've just been on the receiving end of that so many times, that really skillful teaching from retreat leaders. But also being there for you for meditation reviews, chats, walks. Yeah, just amazing that you have these people who have given that time just to sort of support your practice. Very moving. So just briefly going to talk about my own reflections on what a pattern can look like for me on a retreat. So yeah, I spoke about crying when I arrived at Taraloka. So I often get this experience of like a relief of being more fully with my experience. Sometimes just a joy and a relief at the simple act of choosing to experience myself more fully. An appreciation of beauty and simplicity. So yeah, I'm sure you can all relate to this when you meditate and then you sometimes open your eyes. Everything looks more vivid, more bright, more clear, more beautiful. So something about if you're more mindful, you can notice more in both the outer world and your inner world. And I think on a retreat, like often the lakshanas just don't seem quite as shocking. So I think I can see the beauty in impermanence a bit more, and I can feel that truth of interconnection a bit more. And when I experience dukkha, it's not always the case, but often when I'm on a retreat in those positive conditions, I'm not panicked so much by that. It's like I can see these flow of conditions more, and I identify a bit less with my sense of like holding on to them. So I see this sort of flow of how things are moving through me, and that I don't have to sort of hold on to them and fix them. And I sometimes can feel a bit more like in harmony with life. But I always have a day 3 experience, which is when I'm grumpy, disconnected, reactive, feeling doubt. All the hindrances rear up really strongly. And that's just very normal. I just sort of want to reassure you, if that happens on an online retreat or on a residential retreat, it's really normal to feel that. Like, and for me, that means, okay, I'm going deeper here. And often if I can just stay with that experience and trust, then that's when I can start to see my own patterns a bit more. Yeah, and I also find I can just be in contact with a real strength. Vanessa mentioned this as well, and Ed, this real strength of sort of Shraddha, faith. Yeah. And I think connection and communication, I'll say what I mean by communication, with Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So just starting to be in relation more with Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. I don't mean communication in the way of like I'm talking to them and they're talking back to me, although some of you might experience that. I don't experience that personally, but just having a space where I can start to reflect on what Buddha and Bodhisattva figures are important to me, and starting to feel myself in their presence, and then therefore relating to them. And alongside that comes then connecting with my own inner world and my own inner sort of personal myths. So these deeper themes and currents that run through my life and what really matters to me in my life, just connecting with what is really important to me. Finally, I think we go on retreat in order to come back into the world. So we're not going on retreat to get away from the world and to get away from the people in our lives, but we're going on retreat to come back. So there's this element of like, how am I changed? What can I learn? And then how can all of that meet the world? So what I love doing is going to service stations on my way home from retreat. So I absolutely love it. Like, yeah, driving home, stopping at a service station. When I'm on my own, I really enjoy this, like leaving a retreat and just sitting, getting a cup of tea, and I don't know, just sitting in the cafe, people watching, but just having this sense of like, in a way, there's something about the anonymity, but it's like a chance to start to be with how I am and meet the busy world again. So just like, in some way, having a sense of that spaciousness, just sitting on my own amidst the busyness. And yeah, just starting to integrate what my experience on the retreat might have been back into the world and into relation with other people. So I would recommend that if you're up for it. It's a nice practice to do. Yeah, that's me.
Thank you, Kusaladevi. Thank you very much. Thank you all, actually, all 3 of you. That was very rich, actually. We have got only just under 10 minutes, so we're not going to go into groups. I think I think, yeah, let's just see whether there's anybody who'd like to comment or